Well, good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be opening this year's International Women's Day event for the South Westminster Business Improvement Districts. This is our third annual event, which has grown in participation year on year, and despite the virtual nature of today's event, we're still joined by over 300 people this morning. So from London, I'd like to wish you a very warm and sunny welcome to you all. As always, we have a wonderful panel of speakers who will be discussing the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on women in the workplace. And I think over the last 12 months, we can all agree that we've had it's been a seismic impact on all of our lives in terms of how we work, how we interact with each other, our livelihoods. Everything has been threatened, and of course, many lives have been lost as a result of the pandemic. The impacts of COVID will be long lasting. However, as we see the road to recovery on the horizon, it is right that we take stock and try to ensure that with recovery comes improvement. And this sentiment must apply to all women and our position in society. The discussion last year was very encouraging at our International Women's Day event that we held just prior to lockdown. And acknowledging that work is still needed to be done, we have made great strides, and the equality movement have really been representing the voice of women. More than 100 years after some women were first given the vote, it certainly looked like we were on the right trajectory. However, fast forward to today, and according to research data being gathered, the fear is that the global pandemic has set the progress back significantly by several decades. And in fact, PwC has called it a she-cession, where the pandemic has halted and reversed years of women's progress in the workplace. We know that women face discrimination at work, whether it be the gender pay gap or even sexual harassment. These are long-standing inequalities and have come to the fore in recent years, helped by high-profile cases such as the campaign that Carrie Gracie waged on her BBC employers. COVID has not necessarily exacerbated these, but it has shone a light on some of the other issues, arguably based more on outdated stereotypes of women and our role in society. According to McKinsey, women are more vulnerable to COVID-19 related economic efforts because of our existing gender inequalities. So, for example, women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to this crisis than men, for example. And women are more likely to work in those sectors that had to shut down due to the pandemic, such as retail, leisure, and hospitality. And I think with us all working from home over this last year, we've also taken on additional burdens. I know myself, I've got mountains of ironing, homeschooling, all those general domestic tasks. They were always there before, but I seem to be juggling even more than I had before. And during the pandemic, we've seen an increase of mothers responsible for 100% of childcare. Prior to the pandemic, 27% of women were responsible solely for their childcare needs. We've seen an increase of 45% as a result of the pandemic. And to look at these issues in a bit more detail, we've also been running our own survey in the run-up to today's events, and the results are quite startling, with more than 80% of respondents who think their workload has increased as women during the pandemic. And more than a third think that their work performance has suffered due to the pressures of being at home under the lockdown measures, such as dealing with childcare, homeschooling, and other personal challenges, which I think we've all been faced with over the last 12 months. That said, I was particularly encouraged to learn that 90% of the respondents did say that their companies had been understanding. And for me, this particular result provides a valuable insight. I firmly believe that it's the innovation and adaptability of businesses that will see us navigate this recovery. I also believe that as we recover, we have the opportunity to pioneer and create workplaces that are more equal and fair, thereby inspiring society to address gender discrimination once and for all. Just last month, it was announced that there are now no all-male boards in the FTSE 350, and that the number of women on some of the UK's top listed companies in terms of their board makeup has risen by 50% in 5 years. And as we face a huge challenge as a nation, it is these rays of hope that we must embrace. So this year's theme for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. It's said that a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. So as we see this recovery as an opportunity to do things better, let's ensure it works for the whole of society to raise the life chances and aspirations of our younger generation. Let's continue to adapt and embrace new and better ways of working that can be more accommodating and flexible. We need to promote how these changes are transforming workplaces and therefore people's lives, helping others to make similar changes. We need to use our influence to ensure that inequality in all its forms is called out and stopped. People should be judged on their ability to do a job, not by the colour of their skin, their background, their gender, or their sexual orientation. It is therefore essential that we continue to seek solutions, and I very much hope that today's discussion will produce some great new ideas. So for all of you that have logged on to this morning's session, please get involved in the discussion, send in your questions via the Q&A, and using this year's IWD hashtag, Choose to Challenge, please also tag us on our social media at the North Bank Bid and at Victoria Bid on our social media platforms. I'd like to thank you once again for being here today as we embark on this exciting challenge, and to kick things off, I'm really pleased to introduce our charity partner for this year, Rosa. This amazing organisation is a grant-making charity that invests, connects and champions grassroots women's organisations working to make the UK a fairer, safer place for women and girls. While the event today is free, we are asking attendees to support the charity by making a small donation to their Just Giving page. So please do. And before we open up for our panel discussion, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Gill, Executive Director for Rosa, who's going to say a little bit more about the fantastic work that this charity does. So many thanks again for joining us this morning. It's going to be a great session. And now I'd like to hand you over to Rebecca. Many, many thanks.
Thank you, Ruth, for that introduction. Rosa is delighted to be South Westminster BIDs charity partner for this year's International Women's Day. I'm Rebecca, I'm the Executive Director of Rosa, and I'm here to tell you a bit about what we do. Rosa is the only funder dedicated to supporting organisations focusing on women and girls in the UK. We were set up in 2008 and since then have helped hundreds of organisations to support thousands of women. We estimate that around 20,000 women and girls are supported each year through our funding. We aim to distribute around £2 million a year, primarily to small organisations, those with an income of less than £100,000, run by and for women and girls. Most of the organisations we support are rooted in their communities, providing services and advocacy on a whole range of issues, including domestic violence, sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, employment rights, poverty, as well as leadership, mentoring and self-empowerment. Rosa develops funds based on evidence of need, working with organisations in the women and girls sector, as well as other funders and partners, to understand what issues or themes are emerging that our funding can support. A year ago, when the country went into lockdown, we worked with our grantees to understand the impact the pandemic was having. We found organisations struggling with a huge surge in demand, an urgent need to move all their work online, but with no extra funding to support this. In response, we set up a fundraising and we raised about 1.5 million to distribute as COVID-19 emergency grants. We set up two funds. One was a £1 million fund, which awarded small grants of between £5,000 and £15,000 to small organisations. Organisations like Believe, which works in Lewisham with girls and young women aged 8 to 18 to gain confidence and engender individual and social change. Rosa's small grant supported Believe to switch its work online, delivering workshops on issues including mental health, employability and fitness. The other fund was a £500,000 fund which specifically supported organisation, refuge and frontline domestic violence services run by and for Black and minoritised women. This supported organisations like the Sharan Project, which works across the country to provide advice and support to young women who have been at risk of being disowned or ostracised by their families and communities, subject to harmful practices such as forced marriage, honour-based violence and domestic abuse. Through Sharan empowers women to rebuild their lives and make informed choices towards independent living. Their cases rapidly increased during the first lockdown, and with Rosa's funding, they employed a full-time client advisor to provide telephone and online support, enabling young women to seek safety during the pandemic. Rosa is able to run these funding programmes thanks to the generous donations of individuals and organisations who really care about supporting gender equality in this country. Our funding comes from a range of sources, including trust and foundations in the UK, the US and Europe, as well as private sector companies and generous individuals. As part of the event today, South Westminster BIDs are fundraising for Rosa, and donations can be made via the Just Giving link, which will be shared in the chat. All the funding we receive supports the organisations we work with. We are currently developing a new fund which will be used to support organisations led by and for Black and minoritised women working in the UK. We are setting up this fund based on the work we have done over the past year, which has highlighted how much less funding organisations led by Black and minoritised women get compared to other non-profit organisations. Thank you for listening to me today. If you'd like to know more about Rosa and our work with women and girls organisations in the UK, please do contact me. Before I hand over to Joy, the BIDS team has asked me to tell you that all attendees today will be entered into a raffle to win prizes donated by BIDS local businesses. The prizes include Alice Queen of Hearts afternoon tea for two at Taj 51, Hobbs gift card for £150, an aperitivo experience at Gordon's Wine Bar, and one night stay for two people in an executive room at the Park Plaza Hotel. The winners will be contacted via email later this week. I will now hand over to Joy Burnford, the chair leading today's panel discussion. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and it's so inspiring to hear your story and how you're helping so many women and girls. So thank you very much for all that you're doing. And happy International Women's Day for yesterday. As you all now know, the theme for this year's celebration is Choose to Challenge. And I'm hoping by the end of today's session, you'll be all inspired to choose one thing that you're going to challenge. So as Rebecca said, I'm Joy Burnford, and I call myself a curator of confidence. So through my business, My Confidence Matters, I bring together experts to run leadership and coaching programs which inspire and motivate women and men to become more confident future leaders. I'm also passionate about gender equality in the workplace and conduct research in this area, as well as being a regular contributor on Forbes on this subject. Our latest research called Rethinking Leadership Through a Gender Lens, New Ways of Working Resulting from COVID, investigated the impact of COVID-19 on gender balance in business. And I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing today's session because it's a subject that's very close to my heart. I also have two young kids that I've been homeschooling, which has literally driven me to breaking point at times. And so I can certainly empathise with the challenges that working mums and dads have had over the past 12 months. So coming on to the topic of today's event, the impact of the pandemic on working women. You may have heard stats from the World Economic Forum that we're 200 years away from gender parity at work. And this was before the pandemic. And the pandemic has potentially pushed us even further back. You may, I think Ruth mentioned earlier, the McKinsey study, which showed that women are 1.3 times more likely than men to consider leaving the workforce during the pandemic. There is a lot in the press about negatives, and I really think it'd be great today to see if we can reveal some of the positives too, and what we can focus on to move forwards and use COVID as a catalyst to collectively start to change things for the better. So before I introduce the panelists, I would like to just mention that we have the amazing Katie Chappell, who you'll be seeing, who's illustrating this session live. And these illustrations will be shared with you after the event, along with a recording of the session. So we have an incredible lineup of panelists today. We have Jessica Ladderton, and Jessica is the founder and CEO of an African-inspired pop-up events company called Pop-Up Africa, which focuses on supporting entrepreneurs looking to sell African food and retail in some of the most highly sought after spaces at affordable prices. Prior to this, Jessica was a project manager working for various youth organisations that worked in partnership with companies like Channel 4, BBC, Time Out and ITV. Jessica is a mother of 3 children, the youngest being only 11 months old, so she has first-hand experience of having a lockdown baby. So hats off to you, Jessica, and well done just for being here today. Secondly, we have Nicholas Cheffings, who works as a senior counsel for the international law firm Hogan Lovells, having been a partner there for 20 years and its global chair for 6 of these. As part of his broader commitment to helping increase diversity, inclusion and equality in business and society, he holds a number of other board and trustee roles, including chair of Prime, which aims to improve access to the legal profession for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and is a trustee for Making the Leap, which is a London-based charity that works to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to succeed in their chosen career. Nicholas is an amazing ally and is proud to have visited 100 countries, apparently, in his lifetime, although none recently, not surprising to hear. Jessica Chivers. Jessica is a psychologist, author and CEO of the Talent Keeper Specialists, which supports employees and employers to get the most out of people returning to work after an extended absence. Her book, Mother's Work, How to Get a Grip on Guilt and Make a Smooth Return to Work, has been dubbed the book employers should be giving to all their women returners. She also recently launched a podcast called The Comeback Coach. And it made me chuckle when I read on her LinkedIn profile that she was about 9 when she asked her mum whether woman was a contraction of womb and man, and asked why we couldn't have a name of our own. So she became a feminist without even knowing there was a name for it. Lisa Berger took on the role of leading the National Theatre alongside director Rufus Norris in May 2015 and became joint chief exec in March 2019. Lisa has a particular interest in widening audience access and is currently leading a strategic touring project with the goal of increasing theatre going and participation nationally. Not an easy task at the best of times, never mind in the current climate. From 2010 to 2015, Lisa led the highly successful NT Future Project, the National's £80 million redevelopment programme, and Lisa has also held senior roles at the Royal Opera House and Welsh National Opera. And in her spare time, when she's not busy running the theatre, she's taking part in sailing navigation classes. So they have a brief introduction to all our amazing panellists. And for the next 45 minutes, we'll be holding a panel discussion. And at 12 o'clock, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. So as we're talking, please feel free to pop questions in the Q&A and we'll come back to those then. So I'd like to start with Jessica Chivers. I'd love to know what you think has been the most challenging aspect of the pandemic for women. For example, yesterday, I read in The Guardian the headline, half of women in the UK fear equality is going back to the 1970s. I just wondered what your thoughts are on this, Jessica.
Gosh, where to start? Well, you know, there was some research done by the University of Sussex, Alison Lacey, who looked at where the burden was falling for women with children, so mothers, and the majority of mothers are predominantly responsible for the homeschooling, doing more of the caring at home. So I think we've had all of the inequalities that we know already exist between mothers and fathers just exacerbated. And personally, we've been working with lots of coaches who are so close to burning out, who are trying to deliver professionally because they enjoy their work, but they want to prove, you know, I'm still on, I'm still committed. And then they're doing everything at home and they are worn out, Joy. It's been awful. However, I do think, to your point about let's have some positives shared today, and what Ruth talked about at the beginning, that with recovery should come improvement. I think if businesses look at this and think, okay, what have we learned from this? And when we come back, how can we set our stall out differently? That's what I'm hoping. And when you look at research that shows, say from HSBC, there was something I think in 2018, which showed that having the ability to flex and choose where you work is more motivating to staff than financial incentives. That's really encouraging, or should be encouraging, to businesses, because they've got a lever there that they can use that's not going to cost them a bean. And I was really encouraged this weekend. I've just been reading Jolie Brearley's new book, Pregnant Then Screwed, and obviously Campaign Group of the same name. I zipped through that this weekend. And there was a lovely quote that I put up on our Instagram account this morning from Robert Rietbroek, and he is the chief executive of PepsiCo in Australia and New Zealand. And I quote him on our Instagram, which is, he tells fathers, "I'd like you to be a hero at work, but I want you to be a hero at home. If you're only a hero at work, you're only doing half the job." Now, what if we could come back to work and have male leaders, and I say male leaders because let's face it, most of the leaders in our country and in London are male. That's nothing against the female CEOs out there, but this is aimed squarely at men. So you come back with that attitude and think, what's the difference that I can make, and I can role model this? Gender equality, we can make a difference, and let's come back from the pandemic and see how we can set our stalls out differently.
Absolutely.
I'll shut up there, Joy, because I could go on and on.
Oh, I know, it's interesting. And from a male point of view, Nicholas, I was wondering, why do you think the burden has fallen primarily on the shoulders of women? Is this a cultural, societal issue? And do you think organisations, coming back to Jessica's point there, do you think organisations could be doing anything more to encourage their male employees to be available to support their partners more?
Those are really challenging questions, Joy, but they're very legitimate ones. I think, yes, there's a huge societal issue in here. And some of it, sadly, goes back to the days when the men used to go out to work and come home with that little brown envelope with the cash in and give some of it to the wife to look after the house and the children. And sadly, some of those inherent ingrained concepts have not gone away. And I think that there is a huge onus on men to do exactly what has just been described and to do more in the workforce. But again, I think, frankly, and I'm not a psychologist, let alone a sociologist, but men, it's a huge generalization, I think, tend to have a more relaxed approach to parental responsibilities and to home responsibilities. So look, get them a takeaway, it'll be fine, is the kind of thing you can hear a man say, whereas the woman is much more likely to be thinking about making sure they eat properly. Or, it doesn't matter if they watch TV all day today, a day off school is not a big deal, is the kind of thing I think you hear much more frequently from men. So therefore that responsibility doesn't kick in quite as much. But, those are explanations, they're not excuses. And I really do think that it's critical that men step up both at home and at work. There was an interesting article in the Times on Saturday, which was written by the executive editor of the Glamour magazine. And it was very much written from her perspective. And twice, she mentioned her husband twice and said that it would be, he would love to spend more time with the children, and then said he was too busy. And that was all it said. And I have no idea what their circumstances are, but broadly speaking, her message was, I love my children and I wanted children, but I didn't really sign up to be a full-time 100% mother. And it's a balance, and I haven't got that balance. So, for me, I think the work piece is critical. And I think one of the really important things is, as Jessica was saying, the reality is that preponderance of leadership roles are held by men. And I think when we look forward and when we're looking through the issues now, it's really important that men don't look at them from their position of privilege. And, in an age range terms, they're middle-aged to getting old, and their children are probably either have left school or they're at an age where they can basically look after themselves, might have the occasional teenage issues, but broadly speaking, and there's probably a cleaner, there may well be a nanny, and all of those things, and they may have a partner who has retired or never worked. And so for many of them, the pandemic hasn't been a big deal. They've got a nice house, they've got a nice study. And so that, I think, is why you hear some of the things we've heard quite recently. Suck it up, it's not a big deal, stop making a fuss, are just inane things for a man to be saying without any empathy and understanding of the issues that women have been facing.
Mm.
And so I think there's a huge onus on male leaders of businesses to listen to what women are saying, to be empathetic, and to understand that their blinkered perspective of what life is like and what working at home is like is not at all representative of a significant proportion of the people who work for them.
Absolutely. I wonder if it's sometimes that men, and when we're saying men and women here, we're being very generalistic, and obviously there are exceptions to the rule, so I just want to make that clear. But, I think sometimes they don't necessarily know what to do. And I'm very fortunate. I have a very hands-on husband who has always been there for the children. But even with that, I still really struggled. And I think it's the mental load. A lot of women talk about the mental load and what, there's all this stuff you've got to think about when you're trying to work and you're trying to look after the house. So I suppose there's a question about, do men know what to do, and do they know what they're meant to be doing? But that's perhaps something we can come back onto. Thank you, Nicholas. So Jessica Ladderton. I was looking at the Fawcett Society that did some research last year and found that a third of working mothers reported having lost work or hours due to lack of childcare during the pandemic. And this rose to 44% when it came to mothers from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background. I'd love to ask you for your thoughts on this. And personally, what might have made it easier for you in the last year with a young baby? Is there anything that you feel that might have supported you more?
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I did see that report from the Fawcett Society, and I think it's really important that these disparities are highlighted. And again, going back to the positives of the pandemic, if we can pick out any, I think one of the key positives is the fact that it's really, really shone a light on the disparities across the society, and where we're lacking in terms of giving more support to people from a diverse range of backgrounds. For me, as a mum of 3 young children, I think I would have definitely liked a lot more support in terms of, I guess a lot of my support came from my network, actually, of other mothers that are going through the same thing, and being able to talk to them and speak to them. But I think as a business owner as well, I think there could have been a lot more done for funding. Going back to Rebecca's work, just working with BAME business owners, and the fact that we don't get as much funding as our non-Black counterparts. I think funding is definitely an area that we could have got a lot more support with.
Definitely. And Lisa, I would like to talk a little bit about women that are freelancers as well, and also those that are working in the arts, because there's been a huge impact on livelihoods and lack of financial security for them. And I'd love to know what your advice is, Lisa, about, for these women that have been out of work for such a long time and such a lot of this year, and how can they get back on track?
Gosh, I wish I had the answer to that, Joy. I mean, the arts have been so badly impacted by the pandemic, and freelancers, who are the creative heart of what we do in the performing arts. Most of all, 70% of the workforce in the performing arts are freelancers, and 38% of them have not been able to access any form of financial support, which is absolutely shocking. I mean, even the government itself at one rather low point ran a campaign which showed a female ballet dancer tying up a ballet shoe in practice gear but with a tutu, suggesting it was the time for the dancer to retrain and go into cybersecurity. That's something that even the Secretary of State for Culture distanced himself from, but nevertheless it was rather a low point for us. And I think this is impacting on lots of different levels. As employers in the arts, what we have to do is absolutely, as soon as we're able, get back to activity, because activity is going to be the thing that really gets the economy going again. It means we'll be able to employ people, but get people back into towns and cities. And also, getting people back in theatre, working in their communities, making work, working with schools. I think that these are all things that will make us both feel better, but really start to turn things around. I'm terribly worried that in the midst of all of this, women who have certainly in the frontline roles in theatre as writers, directors, traditionally been less well represented. I think that this is a historic overhang at the National Theatre. We've been working incredibly hard to try and address it. One of my big sadnesses is that in 2021, we would finally have achieved the goal of 50% of work on stages being written or directed by women. I feel that in these careers, which are economically uncertain, we're just going to lose people. And we're going to lose people at all levels, both at the better end of the career, the established end of the careers, mid-career, and crucially, people coming in. So there has to be something. We're still lobbying like hard for support for freelancers to keep them going, but also just to make sure that as employers in the arts, as I say, we really focus on making work and getting people back together.
Absolutely, thank you. Does any of the other panelists want to comment on the sort of the freelance situation? Don't worry if not.
Joy, I mean, this is sort of tangential, but it's a conversation I was having yesterday about freelancers and self-employed, the difficulties around parents who are, men, for example, not being able to take advantage of shared parental leave. That was something I was banging the drum about very firmly on LinkedIn yesterday for International Women's Day. And we need to give those fathers access to the same things that they would have if they were employed. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jessica, I was actually going to come back to you again, actually. So the Fawcett Society, as I'm sure you're aware, has accused the government of ignoring mounting evidence of a crisis in gender equality and called for a drastic change of approach. The chief exec actually said it's like we're on a freeway heading in the wrong direction and we keep missing the exits. And she suggests that we urgently need investment in childcare and a serious focus on women, but she's really concerned that without the women in the room and in the positions of power, it's just not going to happen. So I'd love to think about, there's some practical steps we can take to involve women in the decision-making process as lockdown is eased. How do we get these women back into those boardrooms, or into them in the first place, to start having those conversations so that it's a balanced conversation?
Gosh, there is so much to say there, and I'll start by saying I'm a member of the Fawcett Society and have been for a long time. This thing about childcare, Joy, this is a problem that is not going away. We have, I think, either the most expensive or the second most expensive childcare, either in Europe or in the world, I was reading recently. And back when I was a new mother in 2006, I actually attempted to petition government to make childcare tax deductible because I was self-employed. Why should I be having to pay for this when this is a legitimate, in my mind, business expense? And I think that we all ought to be able to make our childcare exempt of tax. Anyway, so what do we do? Well, I don't think this is so much about government legislating as it is about individual businesses deciding if we want to make good decisions. The research tells us we want to have a balance of people in the room. We want to have cognitive diversity, not just gender diversity or based on the colour of someone's skin, but we want to have real cognitive diversity. So if I was leading a big organisation, perhaps one of the BID members, I'd be thinking, how do I get a range of people from across my organisation to come together and think about how can we make life better for us as employees? How do we make our products better? How do we respond to this opportunity that we now have coming back from this pandemic? So it's about individual businesses or organisations deciding to bring a range of people together, and maybe even bringing some of their customers in for goodness sake, and thinking in the round about how we make those improvements. And I saw something online this morning, didn't have a chance to read it, but there's a whisper that Boris is going to reshuffle the cabinet to bring more women in, I think. I don't know if anyone's read that article. I didn't have time, but that would be a really welcome next step from the government.
And now that schools are open, hopefully for the foreseeable future, now is a great time with this, the fact that we can all work online. You can bring these diverse voices together so much more easily from all over the world, all over the country. And actually, you don't need to be, limited to people who can just get to to London, for example. Nicholas, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on that, the point made by Jessica about women being in the room, in the boardroom, etc. And your point, which is absolutely true, about how it has shown us that people can be part of a conversation, even if they're hundreds of miles away, let alone a few miles away. But I think also there is the converse that management have to be very cautious about. And that is that one of the benefits, particularly I think for office workers, is that we have shown that presenteeism is just a nonsense and a myth, and that you can successfully contribute to a business whilst working from home. There are obviously challenges around that, but as a concept, an upside of the pandemic, if I can use that inappropriate phrase, is that managers and leaders can now trust, which was the thing that was missing before, I suspect, their people to be contributing effectively to the business whilst they're not there. And so potentially, I think, for men and women, but particularly for women, the idea of continuing their role, spending an increasing amount of time at home rather than in the office, has become more feasible and more attractive. But I think that puts an onus upon the largely male leaders who will carry on going back to the office to not forget about them when it comes to these decisions. Because if, and I'm exaggerating for effect here, but if 80% of the men have gone back to work and 80% of the women have stayed at home, then there is a real danger that those 80% of men start making the decisions by only talking to themselves. And I think that's a real risk and danger for business, and leaders, and indeed women, need to be very alert to that possibility.
Absolutely. And you must have just read my mind, because my next question was about the increase in remote working and how it could be especially helpful for mothers' careers. But, my personal concern is that we don't revert to a two-track system. Absolutely, as you're saying, Nicholas, with women working at home and men going back into the office. And I've spoken to a lot of organisations who've said, when we go back and we've got a sort of hybrid model, if we're sitting around an organisation boardroom table, we will be sitting there with our laptops on, so we can still have these conversations with people on screen as well, so that the people on screen at home are not feeling like they're sitting somewhere over there and then all the conversations happening in the boardroom. So I think that's a practical, tip that organisations can potentially think about. Jessica Ladderton, I was actually going to ask you about, your thoughts about this, and how we can potentially avoid this happening in the future. This sort of two-track system of women being the ones who are staying at home and reverting back to these sort of earlier ways of working.
I think similar to what my co-speakers have said, I think it's really important that there is a diversity of thought around the table when these decisions are being made. And I think, it's going to be difficult to come to a solution, but I think where there's a varied voice around the table making these decisions, it would be impactful for everybody within these organisations. I think it's really important that we don't go back to business as usual. I think we've seen that flexible working does work and does help companies. So like you said, I think although we've seen that it works, I think moving forward, we have to look at ways that it doesn't ostracise people. We don't have a situation where women are working from home and men are in the boardroom. I think I saw an article yesterday that spoke about the fear that women might miss opportunities to develop within their career because they are working from home and are not as connected with their colleagues as some of the men might be. So I think that is a fair fear, and I think we have to look at that before making any hasty decisions. But again, when it comes to making these decisions, I think it's very, very important that there is a diversity of thought around the table. And speaking from my personal experience, I think flexible working during the pandemic, it's been very difficult, obviously, with the children at home, but actually having an 11-month-old, I've gone back to work a lot sooner than I would have before. And also my husband, he is a self-employed IT contractor, and he has proudly said that he's been involved a lot more this time round with baby number 3 than he has been able to previously. And I think it's really important as well that men use their position of privilege to, think about how they can make a difference for everybody in the workplace.
And it's a really interesting point. And one of the things in our research we talk about is personalisation. And And it's about bringing those, listening to every single person. And it's not about, women this, men this, Black and Asian minority ethnic people this. It's actually thinking about each individual person and listening and asking those individuals about what they need. And I think that's really, really key. It's not about just having that, yes, we do need to think about everybody, but it's those individuals. Everybody has different things. Some people don't have offices. Some people, they might think that all women want to work from home, but actually I can't wait to be able to go back to an office and get away from home. So it's actually, thinking about everybody individually is really important.
Absolutely. It's not a one size fits all solution at all.
And on a positive note, there was a Mumsnet survey that I read about yesterday, which said that nearly two-thirds of respondents said the family unit is now closer. And nearly 70% said their partner spent more time with the kids. So I think it's, there are some positives out there. For me, I think I mentioned to you earlier that, I've actually, my husband is now in the garden with my daughter and my puppy this morning, so I can concentrate on doing this webinar. So, there is a balance, and there's sort of, there's support, and it's about, I think, being clear about what you can, being clear about asking for it as well, and asking for that help, and not just sort of expecting it to happen. I think with men, and saying men generally, telling your husband or partner, this is what I need from you, and I need you to do this. So I'd like to come on, Nicholas, I'd like to come to you next and look at empathy within leadership. So our own research that I mentioned earlier showed that 92% of employees who felt there'd been a change in their manager's leadership style over the COVID period said their level of understanding and empathy had increased, which I was so excited about. And I'd love to know, Nicholas, whether your experience, mirrors whether the research mirrors your experience, and whether this leadership trait is here to stay. Because what I really hope doesn't happen is that all this empathy that's out there at the moment within leadership, that once we said goodbye to COVID, that it just disappears. So I'd love your views, Nicholas, on that.
I think it's a great observation. I think there has been an increase, and I think it's welcome, and I think it will stay. And again, one is always at risk of generalizations here, but for the traditional male, alpha male, macho leader, it's probably not an attribute that they necessarily have, let alone one that they think is relevant to their business. And I think in the early days of the pandemic, the business response to the pandemic had to be very much a directive and leadership one, which played to some of the male strengths of, okay, we have a crisis here. This is what we're going to do. We have to sort this out in relation to our IT. We're going to close the office. Everybody has to work from home. These are the 5 steps we're going to take. A very directive, mandatory process, which played to a lot of those traditional skill sets. But they didn't, over time, continue to play out. And I think more and more people began to see that. And I think what helped is that in their different ways, a lot of male leaders were seeing that actually this was quite complicated and that life wasn't straightforward. And maybe they were not talking about it and pretending that they were fine and not stressed out and not worried, but they could see people around them who were in different circumstances, even if it was in their own home environment. The children, whether male or female, struggling with not being at university or not being at school, etc. And so I think that started to have some impact, and many businesses, I think, became much better at transparent communications. And so you actually heard more leaders talking about the fact that they were struggling a little bit, or they recognized that people were struggling. So I think that has been something that has emerged, and you're right, it needs to stay. And I think that once the kind of genie is out, then it's quite difficult to put it back in. And I think, again, this openness, this receptiveness, and fundamentally this increased awareness about mental well-being, it is really difficult for any leader to ignore, because at the bottom line, when people come out with trite things like, our people are our business, the most important part of our business is our people, etc., etc., you cannot ignore the impact of the pandemic and all of these challenges on people's mental well-being. People who are suffering in any way at all if you're going to be cynical as a leader, are not able to give of their best and to perform to their best to the best benefit of your business. So it's just bad business to ignore those things. So for me, there has been a sea change. Some will revert to type, clearly, but I think most will, with the support actually for those who've got, HR teams, et cetera, who will be, I think, reinforcing the diversity and inclusion, the well-being, and the different perspectives. And I'm quite optimistic about that, and I think it is one of the pluses in terms of leadership and engagement with staff, because it's a critical asset in my view. I'm a bit biased, but I think it's a critical asset.
Absolutely. And I think this should be a real opportunity for women as well, because, I think both men and women need both masculine and feminine leadership traits. But I think empathy is a classic, feminine leadership trait that both men and women need. But if it's a feminine leadership trait, more women will probably have more of this in them. So it's a really good opportunity, I think, to continue along these lines, that we get more women into senior roles who can demonstrate these leadership traits.
I see, and just very, very briefly, I've seen that at Hogan Lovells. One of the leaders there, a female leader, has just been very open and transparent in her communications with people around the country. And just if it's a Friday email saying it's been a tough week, that's not a common statement by a CEO, male CEO of business, to say it's a tough week. That's kind of the last thing that they would contemplate saying. But it resonates with people, and it is really well received.
Any of the other panelists want to comment on this point? It's quite a big one. Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, I guess it's quite interesting for me at the National Theatre, because we've got a dual leadership model. There's me working alongside Rufus Norris, who is artistic director, and we are quite, I think, beautifully complementary, I would say, in our approaches, not just along gender lines, but also along the thinking, feeling approach. And certainly, my goodness, through this pandemic, it has been so fantastically sustaining, I think, for us to have each other in trying to think about how we support each other, but also then how we support all the staff through this extraordinary thing. And interesting for me, my daughters are grown up, they're not at home, his sons are at home. So, not small children, but nevertheless the sort of the bandwidth conundrum certainly going on there, competition as it were. But I think that what we've both found is that the connection with staff through all of this, because normally we work such strange hours in theatre that you don't get everybody together. It can't happen. But actually, through remote working, we can, and we have both become much, much more connected, and therefore aware, I would hope, of the opportunities, as well as the incredible challenges, the opportunities that will be coming our way, and sort of seeing rising stars. I think particularly through some of the young women in this pandemic who maybe in the past might have been slightly more cautious about coming forwards. The sort of the space and the opportunity to prove what can be done, whether it's the innovation in online fundraising or getting our schools programme into people's homes. I think it's been an extraordinary moment just for us to learn and to understand what people can do, and how just giving people the opportunity. And as we go back, as much as I'm anxious about how we support people back amidst all of this uncertainty about health and the sort of environment that they're going to find, whether they're in the office or they're at home, and are they missing out at home, that there is lots of opportunity.
Definitely. And I think, that brings us really nicely onto the next question, which is about looking to the future and thinking about employers. What do you think we can do practically over the next 6 to 12 months? Once life starts to return to hopefully some sort of normality, whatever that looks like. I'd love to know from any of the panelists, what do you think we can do? If you're talking to the employers on this call, what can we do to support women as they start coming back to work? Jessica Chivers?
Yeah, flexibility is absolutely key, Joy. So it's taking those outdated practices and thinking about how can we enable people to do their best work. We need to ask people under what circumstances, what resources do you need? When do you do your best work? And if I may just give Lisa a real kind of big up and a big up for role sharing. Lisa, you are trailblazing something that I think is fantastic, being a co-CEO with Rufus. And I think job sharing is a particularly powerful tool for retaining women at the level that they are at. You know, often women go away and have children and they come back and careers can stall, but job sharing is brilliant because it keeps women at that level and helps them accelerate their careers. And so you are pioneering something by being a job sharing CEO, Lisa. Love to see much more of that.
It's brilliant, and I agree. I heard somebody last week who's the level below chief executive Eva, and there were two men actually sharing the job. And he said I think they're the only ones in the UK at that level who are men sharing that job. Both dads, both proud to be dads, and saying this is the way it should be. So we can actually work, job sharing, and our partners' wives can actually work the other time as well. And I think it's something. I'm just surprised that it doesn't happen more. And I think we should really open up this conversation and try and have that conversation at work more. Jessica, did you want to add anything else on that?
Yeah, I think just to again echo what Jessica Chivers has said, flexibility is key, and also communication. I think it's important that empathy is a massive one. We've all been through so much, change, and there is still a lot more change to come. So I think it's important that as we gradually come out of the lockdown situation and possibly return back to work, it's important to understand what works for individual members of staff, and understand that it's not an all fits one size fits all kind of situation.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, we're sort of coming up to the end of the 45 minutes. So what I'd like to do is a quick sort of roundup from all of you, and coming back to the International Women's Day theme. I'd love to know from each of you what your challenge will be. I'll give you a few minutes to think about it if you haven't already. So for me, my challenge this year is I'm going to write a book called Don't Fix Women, which I feel very passionate about. And I hope this is going to challenge those in charge of organisations to think about how the system might need fixing instead. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, please do feel free to link in with me, because I'd love to talk to you, especially male leaders. I'm on a quest to talk to lots of male leaders on this. So who'd like to go first on the panel to give me your challenge, to try and inspire some people to take some challenges after today? Jessica, Lisa?
Well, I'm back onto freelancers again, and particularly female freelancers, and really thinking about how as an industry we can be supporting them. We sort of woke up with this realisation that people on whom we rely, we don't traditionally support them or invest them. And part of this has to be about policy, has to be about lobbying the government to better understand how they can be supporting, because we can't fix it all for sure within the industry. But certainly we can keep lobbying, and we can keep understanding ourselves how some of the practices that we have within our industry, whether it's about meeting times, the presenteeism that we demand, how we can really explore that and work out how we can just be better, because at the end of the day, that means that we'll be making better theatre and better work, which will be good for everybody.
Brilliant challenge. Jessica Chivers.
So I mentioned it earlier, I posted on LinkedIn yesterday, which has gone crazy, which I love anything that I post that goes crazy when it's to do with fathers and encouraging fathers to be proactive at home. So my Choose to Challenge this International Women's Day is really focused on government, on employers and on individuals and myself. And that's to encourage, for me, it's to encourage employers to think about what are they doing to encourage fathers to take shared parental leave, to tell them when they are an expectant parent, and to think about how they might enhance that pay to make it more attractive for men to take it. I also take a challenge away, which is to encourage the females that we coach when they're coming back from maternity leave to think about sharing some of that leave. And to government, my message is really clear. When they set up shared parental leave in 2015, they really missed a trick by not making a portion of that leave ring-fenced solely for fathers, because we know that in the Nordic countries where they do that, we have much smaller gender pay gaps. And I'll tell you about just one. Iceland tops the World Economic Forum's gender pay gap report year after year. And in Iceland, they set aside 5 months for mothers to have leave, 5 months for fathers, and 2 months that either parent can take. And that contributes to them having a much more gender balanced society, equity around pay. So Choose to Challenge for me is all about shared parental leave.
Fantastic. Nicholas, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Well, I'm loving all the ones I've heard so far. On LinkedIn yesterday, my challenge to male leaders was to stand up and to be very active allies and to not treat this as a woman's issue, and to speak out in public and to speak out in private in all of the ways that you all and those listening now know about. So I've been thinking about something else, something different, and I think it's just to broaden the conversation. I think there is a powerful challenge that we could set for businesses, which is to challenge their supply chains. And as a lawyer, something that one has seen over time is that when your clients say to you, this is not good enough, you have, from a business perspective, to think about what changes you need to make. And some clients in the legal profession have had impact around diversity and inclusion by saying, you've sent an all-male team to this pitch, why? And when clients start to say that, if you want to continue to win their business and win new business, et cetera, you have to think about it. I mean, you shouldn't have to be told, but nevertheless, from a business perspective, when somebody tells you, you reflect. And pretty much all businesses have a supply chain. It might not be enormous, but you can influence it. So why are we doing business with people who are not behaving in the way that we would like them to be doing? Challenging, I think, starts, hopefully, the ball rolling a bit faster than it might otherwise do.
So Jessica, other Jessica.
So my challenge is thinking about how we can use what we've experienced during this time, during this pandemic, and move forward to the next generation of what girls that will become women, have better opportunities than we had, during our time. So, for example, other mothers that come through the ranks have more, confidence to speak up about what they need to ensure that they work well in the workplace, whether it's flexible working, so they don't feel judged by other members of staff or other colleagues.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much to all our panelists for some really great inspiration. And we're now going to move on to the audience questions. We've got some questions coming in now. So one question here is, I'm of the firm view that feminism begins at home with us raising our children, male and female, to take on the fair share of chores. What are your views on this? Can we have true equality if the principal carers, typically mothers, constantly take on the bulk of household chores and associated responsibilities alongside their work commitments? So does anybody want to pick that one up?
I'll pick this one up because this is a massive thing for me. I have 2 girls and a boy, and my husband is very much of that mentality that, well, he was until I came into his life, that, the women do the majority of the household chores, but I'm, raising my son to see that that's not the case. He loves cooking. We've been doing a lot of HelloFresh during the lockdown, and he loves cooking a lot more than my daughter does. So it's just about pulling on children's individual strengths from a young age, and showing them that it's not just a woman's job, it is a job for anybody.
Absolutely, Jessica. And I think the other thing is I find quite useful to do is give specific things to different members of the household. So, and actually to own the whole process. So for example, my daughter plays football, and my husband is the kind of the football person. So he does all the liaising on the football stuff, from, about whether you go to the, getting her kit, her shoes done, or whatever it is, but he owns that process the whole way through. So I don't have to think about it. That's kind of out of my mental load. I don't have to worry about it because I know the football's going to be picked up. So I think that's a key thing, is making sure that you're not even trying to get involved in that. Just let it go and let somebody else pick it up. Nicholas.
The earlier one starts as well, the better. Then you then avoid the gender stereotyping that otherwise just automatically happens. But if that doesn't work, then for those who have children who are thinking of going to university, my mother's policy was a very simple one. You're going to be on your own, you're going to have to look after yourself, so you need to learn how to iron. Yeah. And to be fair, I still love ironing, but don't send me any.
But also about, I was talking about this with somebody yesterday about, the saying that, boys don't cry. And actually, boys do cry. And actually, we have to show that it's fine. And my husband sadly lost his dad last year, and he cried, and he was going out of the room. I said, come back here. Show the children that you're crying, please. Don't shy away from it. We've got to make sure that these stereotypes get squashed. And the other thing that, sorry, this is a bugbear of mine, but my son started a new school last year, and the girls play hockey and netball, and the boys play football and rugby. And if my daughter had been there, she's a great footballer, and she wouldn't have had the opportunity to play football. And this is something I'm on a mission to try and fix this at some point, because I think that's just starting from such a young age to stereotype people, saying, well, girls do this and boys do this. Anyway, don't get me started on that. So coming on, another question here, building on the feminine masculine leadership traits question, rather than trying to ensure everyone has both sets of traits, how do we encourage traditionally female skills like communication, relationship building to be valued as much as traditionally male skills in the corporate workplace? Anybody want to pick that one up?
Well, I think they are because I think actually the future of business is, and certainly from this pandemic, has been so much about communication and empathy. And certainly, I think we're going to increasingly see in successful businesses that people either have to nurture those in themselves if they don't have them, or at least be aware that they are maybe not as developed as they should be, and seek out in their teams people who are. I mean, I'm a great believer that actually men and women can have masculine and feminine characteristics differently. My background is in finance, and I know it's often put to me that because I came through that rather masculine route, maybe some of my leadership style is rather rooted in that way. So having spent quite a while sort of thinking about that and working on it, I'm fascinated to see how this doesn't necessarily just go down gender lines, but can actually be completely across. And what we need to be looking at is very much mixed leadership teams.
And who's good at the job? Who can do the job at the end of the day? So talk about.
I think you can support people.
Yeah.
Also to develop skills that make people aware of what they need to flourish.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions here about male colleagues being allies to female colleagues. Do you have suggestions on how we can more actively engage men in this debate? And I think a lot of men I speak to say, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I don't know what to do. And actually, what can we, Nicholas, maybe this is one for you. What do we need to do to make your lives easier, to be better allies to us?
I think there are lots of men who are concerned about saying the wrong thing, whether it's gender, race, etc., and occasionally they will say something which just kind of doesn't land brilliantly well. I think that in those situations, it's a low-key conversation that says some version of, I know you meant well, it didn't quite come out the way you intended it, but we really welcome your support and this is the kind of thing we need to hear more of, but, next time you might just say this instead. But, really, really great to have you backing us and supporting us. And so reinforce the positive rather than kind of hit the negative, because if they try once and it lands badly and, somebody reacts badly, then they are literally never going to try again. And I think that is part of what needs to happen. I think trying to also get them involved in things that they might not naturally get involved in, so that they begin to understand the broader issues. It's a bit like the wider pandemic. So that whole swathe of men, leaders or employees, work colleagues who have not really thought about mental health issues because they've got this hard face exterior, etc., and stress is for wimps and all of that kind of thing, have now had this visibility of other people, which has made them slightly reflect themselves upon their own situation. And I think getting them involved in the conversations, and if, for me, and this applies, I think, to a lot of leadership issues, if people don't automatically get it, but you want them on side and you want them to be part of it, then I think identifying a business need for them to understand and to be involved, whether it's as basic as, look, 60% of our people are female, and you really need to understand that they don't necessarily think like you all the time. And so whilst you have just said that, or just issued this directive, or just made this policy decision, and it makes perfect sense to you, there is a high probability that half of the 60% of the females in this workplace are going to think you've completely misjudged that for the following reason. And you don't want to do that, because that gets them offside. They're not giving of their best, etc., etc. So I think just getting them to focus sometimes on the business benefit of engagement and understanding and empathy, or whatever else it is, and being part of the conversation is key to it, really.
Jessica.
Yeah, really great point, Nicholas. And just to add on, I first became aware of a programme called MARC, which stands for Men Advocating Real Change. It's a programme from Catalyst, which is a US organisation around addressing gender inequality. And I first became aware of that through the technology company Dell. So Dell have run the MARC programme from their very senior leadership team downwards. So I think that's one thing that organisations could do. A second thing that can be really powerful is reverse mentoring. And it might just be a one-off mentoring conversation, but where senior people have a mentoring conversation with someone more junior, but actually it's the junior person talking to the more senior person about what they enjoy about their role, what some of their challenges are. And if some of those very senior men were hearing from more junior females about some of the challenges that they're hearing, I think change can come more quickly, often more quickly than if we're just looking at data and hard evidence that shows if we are more like this, then we will get a better bottom line. And there's so much of that stuff out there. But when you as an individual hear from someone else saying, well, I love my work here, but I sort of had to go down to 3.5 days a week because blah, 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 then you start to, as a leader, your mind gets opened up to things thinking, well, that needn't be a problem. Or why do we do things like that? We could make a change. And so I just think putting people in touch with people, individual conversations about what it's like to work here and how we can make it better.
Yeah, great point. I love reverse mentoring.
And that's a fairly easy thing to put in place as well, which is a really good practical point.
And just to add to that really quickly, I think as much as the intention is there, if we don't attach some sort of accountability, it becomes difficult to, really hold people to their word. So as well as reverse mentoring, which I think is also a fantastic idea, I think if we attach certain things, not just around engaging more women in the workplace, but other areas of diversity, if we attach it to policy within that workplace, I think it just becomes a part of the everyday work and a part of what the organisation does.
Definitely. And then there's probably time for one more question. So there's a question here: as a female leader who values empathy on an all-male team, how do you avoid being seen, treated as the go-to empathy person in a workplace? Even if this is part of one's own personality traits, what do you recommend to ensure empathy is a shared responsibility and not one that is automatically left with the women on a team? That's a great question. I know Jessica did respond to that in the comments, but I wondered if any of the other panelists had any thoughts on that one. Or Jessica.
Well, I'm just nodding away, recognizing it. I think one of the things we've done in the pandemic is have this listening project where a number of us, essentially all staff, had the chance to talk about how the pandemic has been and what's gone well and what hasn't gone well and what we need to know in planning going forwards. And I think each member of the senior team being involved in that at some point or other has been an important way of getting us to stop and listen and really hear. And of course, I would also say that theatre is the most fantastic way of developing those skills of empathy. But I think as a woman, sometimes I go to lean into something and then sort of think, no, actually, I'm going to stop for a moment and wait and see who else might pick it up, or then in one-to-ones talking to people who report to me about the fact that it would be good if. Yeah. So those sort of supervision type sessions can be incredibly useful, just nudging people or just finding out why they didn't do it. Yeah. Because I think sometimes people just find they haven't got the words, and practicing the words can help. Just saying, no, it's fine for you to ask. Not only is it fine for you to ask, it's a bit odd if you don't ask. You don't know about what's going on. Yes, of course there are professional boundaries, but you do need to be able to understand a bit about what's going on in somebody's life to be able to support them in work as well.
Brilliant. And I think that's a really lovely thing to end on, Lisa, about listening skills and being curious. I think, if we can all go away from today and I think, be more curious about how everybody's feeling and how we can support, that'd be fantastic. So I hope you've enjoyed the debate today as much as I have, and that you're now feeling inspired to go away and take a challenge to create a better gender balance in the workplace in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.